I've asked Barry to come and share his a little bit of his story. 82 years is a lot. I've asked him, I think, what did I say? I said...
25 minutes.
25 minutes? Some of the highlights of your life and the way in which God has motivated you to do the things that you've done and that sort of thing.
All right, thank you. If I get boring, somehow tell me and I'll
get up and walk
and stop. Robin will stand up and leave. I grew up in a pseudo-Christian home. I was sent to Sunday school and I was blessed very much by that because you have a background. So many young people who I talk to today know nothing, zero. They know nothing about God, they know nothing about the Bible, and it's hard to have a conversation. So I'm very thankful to God for that. My father used to be, he was a regular church attendant, at least once a year. Sometimes he broke the rules and went twice a year. My mother, on the other hand, came very often, but I don't think it meant a lot to her in those early days. It came to later in her life, and that's a great hope to me as I see people. I mean, when we first went out to the mission field, she objected strongly. I think she just wanted to see us and her grandchildren at home, but she didn't like us being, as she called it...
Living on charity.
Pardon?
Living on charity.
Living on charity. And at the end of it, the last time we went out, and she died that time when we were out, she gave us her matriarchal blessing, and it was tremendous. Well, our Sunday school teacher, I was at, this is a big church service for me, in my experience as a young person. Often there would be the preacher, somebody playing the music, and maybe 2 or 3 people. But this Sunday school teacher was an old lady, and as a young kid, old ladies, they're old ladies, I suppose. But at any rate, into our district came a vibrant family, a fellow who had been a sergeant instructor in the army. He was very much loved the Lord, and the family was on fire, and so I got a new taste of it, and I was taken to a Youth for Christ rally. I made a decision for Christ. I came home and told my family, and my father said, "Well, you're a sensible young fellow, you'll be over all of this rubbish within 3 months." Well, now that's a very helpful thing to say. And I don't say that with my tongue in my cheek, because if you're a young fellow, as a teenager, if your father says you won't, you will. And so it was a great stimulus for me to stick on with it, at any rate. So I was blessed. We had a fantastic youth group at school, Crusader group. This fellow was our Sunday school teacher for years, and then when I went to university and living in the city, we were sitting under some fantastic Bible teachers, and so I had this very solid background. And at coming to the end of high school, now I loved school. I can't see how people say they don't like school. School was fantastic. I enjoyed it. And at the end of it, I didn't know what to do. Was I going to be a farmer? My grandfather was a farmer. I'd grown up on a little farm. Was I going to be a school teacher? Was I going to be perhaps a doctor? And the doctor business was stimulated by Dr. Paul White. Some of you at least will know he used to have a session every Sunday night on the radio, and he sort of inflamed my vision for that. And so I did that. I went to university and did medicine. Now, I had all of those sexual urgings of a young guy. I had one previous girlfriend prior to my wife, and I enjoyed a bit of kissing and holding hands, but then this sort of lovely blackhead streamed across my life. And I was getting old by then. I was 16. But we have been a unit virtually ever since then, by God's grace. We were married when I was 23, when Robbie was 21. And when we gave a testimony, I have to say this. I have been really blessed by this strange woman. She has met somebody who has been married to somebody who, at the peak of my surgical career, I was earning $1 million a year. So I was a fairly high up surgeon, but she was very, very willing to say, no, we'll give it all up and we'll go overseas. And she's been that sort of woman. I can remember one day we were in a holiday home in Ethiopia, and somebody talking about doctors and doctors' wives said that they couldn't really believe that she was a doctor's wife, and asked why. They said, well, because she's so ordinary. She's so free to mix with us. There's none of this uppity-doo-dah-dah business. She's just a lovely person. She has been, to me, an enormous help and encouragement. Now, he didn't say 25 minutes, and I must be fairly quick. But, people say, well, what miraculous things have happened? Have miraculous things happened? Well, I remember walking through customs in Ethiopia with a whole batch of medicines which I knew was illegal to bring into the country. It was legal in the sense that it was worldwide recognised stuff, and running my surgical service depended on having it. And at any rate, and the customs officer and I was having a bit of a go in. Won't. Yes, you will. Won't. But I need it. And quite fascinatingly, at that moment, the fellow behind me, who I'd never seen before, I didn't know who he was, but obviously was a man of some influence, just stepped up beside me and said, let him take it. And she let me take it. Now, I think that's God's interference, putting his nose in the pie, because it meant that this valuable stuff, which would have been wasted if I hadn't been able to take it in, was there and serviced. Have I seen miraculous healing? Well, I'm a bit suspicious about the healing ministry. Not that it doesn't occur, but I think some of it's pseudo and fake. But I remember one day when we had 3 women come in within 5 minutes of one another into the surgical unit with ruptured uteruses. They had obstructed labours and their uterus had burst. The baby was lying free inside their abdomen, and that's not a nice condition. And so I operated on them, all 3 of them in turn, and 2 of them did very, very well. The 3rd one, we tried everything we knew, and then the nurses and I said, well, if there's not a miracle, she's dead. That night, the nurses organised a prayer meeting, asking God if it was his will to heal, and she got better from there on. And I have to see that as God Again, being a nosy Parker, a busybody, and playing around with our affairs. And I'm very grateful to acknowledge that. But I have to say that how do I hear God speaking to me? Through his word. Quite frankly, with the Bible. And I think that the church is in a bit of a mess in many, many places because we don't know where we're going. But the Bible tells us where we should be going and how to get there. And so that has been, I have sought to know his word and to obey it. Because after all, the promise that given through Jeremiah that God was going to deal with people in a different way, was he was going to write his laws on our hearts and on our minds. And how does he write them on our hearts and our minds? By us reading what he says and then letting his word become real in our living. I'm getting older. I won't agree to being old, but I'm getting older. And as you get older, life seems to shrink around you. I mean, just 4 years ago, I was head of a medical school, the surgical department of a medical school, which had 177 students per year. So I was able to run a big business. Now, I still am able to take myself to the toilet and get in and out of bed. But you're limited very much on what you were. And that's difficult. But what perhaps God has been saying to me, and I've heard him saying it very clear lately, are two things. First of all, you're called to stick with it, to persist until the end. There's no such thing as retirement from your relationship with God. Stick with it to the end. And the other thing that's come across to me very strongly is hell is a reality. It's not a fear for me, but it's so desperate that our eyes, the eyes of our world, suddenly stop seeing death as the end and realise that this life is a preparatory session. I thank God for coming with me, for leading me, for going behind me for 82 years. Thank you.